Hello everyone, this is Kat and welcome back to My Hero Academia Podfics. This will be the continuation of Yuuei Survival Guide. This will be part 43, chapter 43. Izuku wakes up in a cold sweat. He chokes on a dry breath, jerking up to his knees as he heaves for oxygen. His head spins with thoughts and feelings and memories that aren't his. That had been someone else's memories. He just sat in someone else's memories. First memories. That had to be first. There was no other explanation. He blearily remembers first meeting first, after the Hosu incident where Izuku had almost died, but this was different. It was odd seeing first with an actual body. It had been so long since he'd even heard whispers of the vestiges that he'd almost forgotten what first even looked like. He didn't look different, though, not really. There was just something without the familiar ghostly cling to him. Izuku had come to associate the vestiges with it. Like at the sports festival where Izuku could make out nothing but shadowy figures with glowing eyes, barely there flickers of, well, he isn't really sure what it really is, since no other ghost Izuku had met was like that, but maybe flickers of one for all clinging to them. Then he'd seen the same murky, shadowy cling to first when he'd first seen Izuku in that dream at the hospital, when he'd come within an inch of his own life because he hadn't been careful enough, and hadn't known about one for all, or Oboro, or even his ghost-seeing ability. He'd known distantly that it was first he was seeing in the dream, first in an actual, solid human form, without the tells that he was a vestige long dead. It was a dream so clear, so natural, as if Izuku could have walked in on the two fighting in real life. It was strange to see him so clearly, looking so regular. Frankly, the only thing that had let Izuku know that it wasn't just a fight happening now, between two living people, was the tendrils of dark, ominous mist clinging to the two men. Izuku thinks back to the dream, no, the memory, and to the man down on all fours as someone stands over him, smiling too sharply to be friendly. Someone called first little brother, and with such a familiar voice that Izuku knows if he'd had the freedom to make any sounds at all, he probably would have squeaked in fear. It was a voice Izuku's sure he'll never forget. He hadn't spoken to the villain, hadn't even really heard him, but even in his unconscious state his mind had grasped desperately at the sound of danger, clinging to it and ingraining it deep into the depths of his mind to the point that Izuku's sure he'll always startle at a deep, confident drawl. There wasn't a doubt in his mind about who he'd been looking at. That had been all for one. Young and cruel, and just as powerful, yet without the conniving experience the man mentoring Shigaraki has now. The start of his reign. When he'd forced a quirk into first unwilling hands. He knows All for One looks different after living so long. His appearance may have changed between that memory and the arrest photos Izuku had seen after All for One had been taken into custody, but you can't change your voice. Izuku draws in a stuttery breath, reaching up to cover first his mouth with his hand and then drag feather-like fingertips down to his neck, both of which had been consumed by the restraints of One for All as he watched the scene unfold before his eyes. He hadn't been there to speak this time, no, his purpose had been to watch. He was being shown something, the origin of One for All, to see how everything had happened and to understand. "Hey, Izuku!" Izuku jerks, twisting his body to face the direction of the shout. His breath catches in his lungs, only to ease out when he spots Oboro leaning over the bed, hand wrapped tightly around Izuku's second hand, clutching at his wrist. One for All flutters across his fingertips. "Come on, calm down. What's wrong? You almost punched the window. What the hell was that? Hey, you with me?" When Izuku finally clears his head, he manages to nod. His eyes scan up from the ghost's hands to his face, just about the same eye level as Izuku, while he's leaning over the bed, tight grip still restricting Izuku's wrist. They're almost eye to eye. Oboro looks spooked and anxious, and Izuku doesn't feel much better than his ghost friend looks, his own gaze scanning Izuku more intently than Izuku had been surveying over him. "Are you okay?" "Yeah," Izuku breathes out, lifting his hand from his neck when he realizes Oboro's eyes keep flickering down to his grip worriedly. He hadn't even realized that's where he'd left his hand, too busy trying to process what he'd just been walked through. He realizes next that Oboro still has a tight hold on his other wrist, so he forcefully deactivates One for All, unsure when it had been activated in the first place, and gently tugs away from his friend's grip. He stares down at his hand, heart hammering in his chest. He reaches up to card anxiously through his curls, now shifting from his knees to settle on the edge of the bed, throwing his legs over the side of it and sinking down in exhaustion. Oboro sinks down to his knees on the floor at his bedside. Izuku's knee accidentally bumps against Oboro's upper arm as they both settle. The ghost doesn't seem to mind, though, readjusting himself until he sat crisscross on the floor, eyes not drifting away from Izuku for even a second as he does so. "Yeah," Izuku repeats when he realizes he'd been quiet too long, and that Oboro was studying him worriedly. The word feels dry in his mouth, and Izuku's unsure if he's telling the ghost the truth or trying to convince himself. Yeah, I'm good. Okay, I'm okay. Yeah? Oboro narrows his eyes, and Izuku hears the sarcastic curl as his friend repeats his poor attempt at convincing. 'Cause it certainly doesn't look like you're okay. People don't usually shoot ramrod up straight in the middle of the night when they're enjoying a nice calm REM sleep cycle. You activated your quirk. Almost blew out the window. What happened? Was it a nightmare? You woke up in a panic and you were touching your neck. Shigaraki again? No, nothing like that. Izuku shakes his head, letting his hands fall to his lap as the ghost blinks in confusion, shifting so he's sitting crisscross on the floor of Izuku's dorm. Izuku scans the room quickly as a brief distraction, eyes settling on the book Oboro had been reading when he'd stumbled into bed last night, dropped open, pages down on the floor by the desk. He must have panicked when Izuku woke up and dropped the book. Izuku feels phantom tingles of restriction on his wrist and imagines Oboro launching up to grab him before he could do any damage to the dorm room or himself. Izuku feels a wave of guilt blow through his chest, eyes dropping to his lap to avoid looking at Oboro. It wasn't a nightmare, Izuku admits, chewing on his bottom lip. It was a memory. Must have been a bad one if you woke up like that. Oboro frowns, cocking his head to the side. Was it about your mother? Or your dad? Want to talk about it? I hear it helps, and I totally won't tell anyone else, you know. Your secrets are safe with me. Izuku hesitates, shaking his head. It wasn't mine. It wasn't yours, Oboro repeats in confusion. All right, hang on. You're gonna have to explain that one to me, Izuku, because I don't think we're on the same page anymore. You relived a memory that wasn't yours. Izuku nods slowly, bowing his head. It wasn't my memory. It was someone else's. Reenactment, I think. Of the past. I think they're trying to connect with me. He was showing me. Who? Oboro questions desperately, clearly not on Izuku's wavelength. It's not surprising. Izuku hadn't even mentioned the vestiges since the Hosu hospital stay, and Oboro hadn't entirely been in his right mind as he came to terms with everything. Plus, Izuku had no reason to mention the vestiges when they gave him nothing but radio silence. First, Izuku squeezes his eyes shut, shaking his bowed head until curls curtain his eyes. And the vestiges. He told me I wasn't ready before, and they, I don't know, stepped back. I haven't heard or felt them, not since they'd helped us during that boot camp attack, and they've distanced themselves, but I saw them. In that dream, I was there with them. They were the clearest I've ever seen them, all the vestiges. They're reaching out again, Oboro asked, worrying his bottom lip between his teeth. Why? Why now? What did he show you, first? You said it was a memory? I don't know, Izuku breathes out. He was showing me what happened, with All for One. What really happened. They really are brothers. He showed me All for One transferring quirks between people. There's no doubt in my mind that that wasn't All for One. They were fighting, everything he showed me. They were always fighting. He, All for One, he's been building an army. People indebted to him. Izuku pauses, swallowing hard. He thinks about first the defeat of being locked away by your brother, being forced into something that you don't want, something you stand against. He locked him up, Izuku whispers, feeling the ghost hand settle on his knee. He forced One for All onto him, Oboro. First didn't want a quirk, he struggled, but First was no match against All for One. I couldn't help him. It was a memory. Oboro's voice is soft but serious. He didn't want help. He wanted you to know. Izuku nods stiffly, but it doesn't make it feel right. He watched First suffer at the hands of his brother. First was the kind of person Izuku saved, but he couldn't. It was as cruel as it was informative to be put in a position where he couldn't help. I have to get better, Izuku tells his friend. First said I was only using 20% of One for All. I need to get stronger. He wouldn't be telling me this for no reason. Something's going to happen. What? Oboro startles. What did he say? How do you know? I don't know, Izuku admits. I just feel. He told me not to be afraid, and he said I wasn't alone. I don't know what that means, but it must mean something. They don't do anything without cause, I know that. Why now? Okay, Oboro breathes out, looking startled. Okay, yeah, that's definitely ominous. I still don't trust that guy. Seems sketchy. He didn't say anything else? Nothing else helpful? He's the first wielder. He's got to have a plan or something, right? Izuku shrugs helplessly, shaking his head. If he does, I'm not ready for it. I need to work harder. I need to get better at using One for All, using more of it. I'm not working hard enough. Don't say that. Oboro chided sternly, shaking his head in discontent. You've been working your ass off with that quirk, Izuku. You could hardly stand when you got back to the dorms yesterday. Shota probably would have benched you instantly if he'd seen you walking around like a zombie. They keep telling you to get better, but no one seems to be offering you any help in doing it. They're ghosts, Izuku mutters. What exactly would you like them to do? I'm a ghost too, Oboro snaps tiredly. You don't see me watching you push yourself into exhaustion and then telling you that you need to get stronger. Why can't they acknowledge that you're trying? Would it kill them to tell you that you're doing good instead of constantly reminding you that you're not good enough? We're talking about a 200-year-old quirk that I'm not picking up fast enough. Izuku frowns, pushing himself off the bed. He moves to the closet, stripping the physical education uniform he'd passed out in off to exchange for his workout clothes. Shigaraki is going to make a move, and I'm not good enough to stop him yet. First, he's trying to help me. I do need to get stronger. 20%, Oboro. I can only use 20% of the quirk. Do you think I can beat Shigaraki and All for One with 20%? I think you're being too hard on yourself when you're basically learning this on your own. I think those vestiges are pushing a 16-year-old who is already in over his head too hard too fast. I think they're expecting a lot from you when they're offering you no help whatsoever. Oboro huffs out, pushing himself up off the floor and plopping down on the edge of the bed. He averts his gaze from the changing teenager. There's a ruffling of fabrics as Izuku picks through his closet, no doubt looking for his workout clothes. Oboro almost rolls his eyes. Izuku doesn't reply, but Oboro honestly hadn't been expecting him to. He'd never been good at taking a compliment and accepting that he'd been doing fine when it comes to One for All. Izuku would rather focus on the negatives, pushing himself past the limit to appease and prove himself. He's definitely a hero in the making. Look, the ghost glares down at the floor. I think you're doing amazing. You're not ready. He's right about that. And you do need to get stronger, but you're working hard. You're getting it. Pretty damn fast, too, considering how much time you spend practicing alone. You're doing just fine. Izuku moves away from the closet, and that's when Oboro lifts his gaze back up. As expected, Izuku's dressed in his workout clothes. I appreciate that. The boy sighs, finally looking back at the ghost. I know you don't like this, and I get what you're saying. But I can't not keep going. At some point, I'll need to use One for All, and if that point comes and I'm not ready, we're all screwed. They're trusting me with One for All. All Might first, the other vestiges. You're going to hurt yourself. Oboro sighs, shaking his head. You'll run yourself right into the ground. I know this is important, I get it, but don't forget about you. We're all screwed if you're not ready, sure, but we're also all screwed if you burn yourself out. One for All is still a quirk at its base. You can and will get quirk exhaustion if you keep going full force. I know, Izuku sighs out, setting his hand on his dorm door. I'll be careful, I promise. And you're always around to tell me to stop if it gets out of hand, right? Now, are you going to come running with me or just sit in here moping? Yeah, 'cause that's worked so well for me so far. Is it too early to tell you to stop now? Oboro draws out sarcastically, earning an unamused glance from the green-haired teen. Oboro sighs heavily as Izuku turns back toward the door, pushing himself up to follow behind his friend. As much as he'd like to mope, he really should keep an eye on Izuku. You're psycho. You know that. You only slept like 4 hours, right? Too tired to even change out of your sweat-soaked gym uniform last night, but here you are, amped up for a morning run. You're ridiculous. I like running, Izuku huffs under his breath, tugging his door open and stepping out into the silent hallway. There are no lights, and Izuku's sure his classmates won't be up for a while, or he hopes at least. It's really early. And I need to be energized for classes today. We're fighting against 1B, remember? Any sane person would try to get enough sleep to be ready for something grueling like that. I think we've already established that I'm not sane, Izuku laughs as he pushes his way out of the Heights Alliance doors. The cool early morning breeze cools off his heated cheeks, the sky overhead dark. The sun hasn't even started rising yet. I'll be fine. Besides, I don't think I'll be able to sleep after that dream anyways, so I might as well be productive. You're definitely going to end up in Recovery Girl's office. Oboro knew that Izuku was going to push too hard. He knew that those stupid, all-knowing vestiges would shove him right over the edge of a cliff. Oboro grits his teeth in annoyance, glaring at Izuku's unconscious form laid out on the cot in Recovery Girl's office. Wait, no, that's not entirely true. He's not glaring at Izuku, he decides. He's simply glaring daggers at One for All, which just so happens to be inside of Izuku. as if he can isolate it in the boy's body and glare hard enough that every pushy ghost in that quirk knows he's pissed off. He hopes those vestiges can see him glaring at them, maybe even feel it. It's not like anyone else will give them hell for overworking a high school student, so Oboro hopes that they can see him now and feel even just an ounce of guilt. They're supposed to be heroes, but here they are pushing too hard. Pushing a kid too hard. A quirk. They'd given him another quirk. Oboro doesn't know what the hell had happened during that training exercise. It's not like Izuku stopped to enlighten Oboro of what the hell just happened, as he'd fallen to his knees and promptly passed out from what Recovered Girl had declared to be quirk exhaustion. Oboro only knows what he's seen, and what he'd seen was Izuku summoning some tentacle whip-like thing that had repelled him through ground gamma without care. Oboro's not sure he'll ever forget watching Izuku struggle to contain the chaotic whips of some unknown quirk that had just been thrust into his hands, crying out in pain as that new, unknown quirk took his body hostage and put Izuku and everyone around him in danger. And that, if it wasn't already clear enough, is not one of the two quirks that Izuku already possessed. That was not seeing ghosts, or even using a ghost quirk like he had been practicing with Oboro, and it was not what they already knew of One for All, a power stockpiling quirk, to be. In hindsight, Izuku's dream that morning makes much more sense. Oboro had felt off about that dream memory thing Izuku had startled awake from, with One for All racing through his veins and pushing out waves of energy that had almost destroyed Izuku's dorm room if Oboro had let him flail his wrist when he'd shot awake. First had apparently been planning something, and as Oboro expected, Izuku hadn't been prepared. Yet another thing the poor kid had been tossed into head first. Like, come on, would it have been so hard for First to offer a bit of warning? Oboro grits his teeth and looks away sharply. It had started off normally, or as normal as Yuuei and Shota's class tended to get. It was Hitoshi's first real integration into the hero course since he'd been transferred into 1A. Since the transfer, he'd just been doing core subjects with 1A, so this will be the first time he gets to use his quirk and work with his peers. The purple-haired teen still doesn't have his provisional license quite yet, but Shota had deemed him to a point where he could hold his own against the hero students, and the longer they put off letting Hitoshi work with his classmates, the further behind he was going to get. He doesn't need a license to work with other students within the safety of the school, so putting it off would just cause larger gaps in his education. Plus, Hitoshi should start working with the other hero students as soon as possible, if just so he can familiarize himself with quirks and personalities. 1A and 1B, to a degree, have been learning one another since day one, whereas Hitoshi is coming into this nearly blindly. Everyone had come a long way since the sports festival. Oboro knows that this is more or less Hitoshi's entrance exam, even if he was already a member of 1A. All Might and Shota had vouched for him, but that was mostly quirk-related. Hitoshi needed to be up to par with 1A, both quirk-wise and physically, to really finalize the transfer. The rules had been simple enough. Hitoshi would be grouped with some 1A students and fight 1B, and then he'd be grouped with some 1B students and fight some 1A kids. It was a little wonky considering 1A's numbers were off now that Mineta was gone, and Hitoshi was officially part of 1A, filling that 20th seat, but Shota had been adamant about Hitoshi working with both classes. Oboro gets it. You can learn a lot about someone by working with them, but you can learn just as much, if not more, by working against them. Hitoshi needs all the help he can get if he's going to be settling into 1A entirely, when he gets his license at the end of the month. Most of the fights are 4 against 4, and then there's 2 battles where it's 5 against 4, one where Hitoshi joins forces with 4 1A kids fighting against 4 1B, and the other where it's 5 1B kids against 4 1A kids. The last battle is the smallest, Izuku's group, where it's just 3 against 4, where Hitoshi is working with the 1B students against Izuku's. Oboro had been the most excited for that matchup, especially since Izuku and Hitoshi were so close. It's always fun seeing friends work together, but it's even more fun watching friends work against one another. Having someone who knows you so well in the opposite team is always a challenge, and it will be for both Izuku and Hitoshi, Oboro is sure. It started off fine. Oboro found himself a nice vantage point where he could sit above the fights, one out of the way and still able to watch all the students below at once. The matchups were pretty good, and Oboro had been surprised that 1B had managed a win and a draw. He only knows how good 1A is, and doesn't know these kids at all, but he's still happy for them. Shota's kids have come such a long way already, so seeing Vlad King's students keeping pace was great. Oboro wonders if he should start sitting in on some of their classes as well, and he probably would, if 1B didn't do heroics at the same time that 1A did. He was loyal to Izuku and Shota, after all. He watches the battle, and even finds himself cheering from above for some of the students. Each round is better than the next, and it's really cool just watching the students problem solve, fight and adapt their quirks and fight styles to get one over on the opposite side. He doesn't see Izuku after the teams are sorted and everyone is getting ready to start. Izuku's up with the rest of the students and teachers, and Oboro doesn't want to be a distraction of any sort when Izuku, Uraraka, and Ashido are fighting Hitoshi and the 3 1B kids, including the loudmouth copycat who's always picking fights. Izuku needs to keep his attention on class and strategizing. The last fight is about as good as Oboro expects it to be, and he means that both ways, expecting it to be quite the entertaining battle between so many strong students, yet also expecting something to go wrong somewhere. He just has a bad feeling about today, after seeing Izuku jolt awake that morning, expressing no awareness of being awake or one for all. He'd never seen Izuku look like that, never so startled, so distant. Oboro keeps his distance, stays planted above where he'd been all afternoon while the students competed and battled. He learned his lesson of getting in Izuku's way when there are others around. The sports festival had been more than enough trauma to remind Oboro to stay away while Izuku's working with classmates. He's not surprised when the blonde Monoma targets and provokes Izuku. It's a good strategy, distracting the most physical quirk on the field first, but Oboro knows Monoma has no filter, and will say whatever he can to rile Izuku up. Oboro knows all is lost when Monoma mentions Bakugo and All Might. And it's probably the worst thing he could have said, because not only was Bakugo a sore subject for Izuku, Bakugo's distress about the number one hero especially, which Monoma had dug into directly, but also Izuku feels guilty, still about All Might losing those last embers of One for All. Oboro winces, spotting, even from afar, how Izuku's expression presses taut in what can only be fury. If he knows Izuku, and he likes to think he does by now, he knows Izuku is preparing to launch into this fight wholeheartedly, as if to defend his, Bakugo, and even All Might's honor. Oboro knows Izuku has a tendency to use just enough force to win or apprehend, especially when fighting peers and other students. He is capable of really hurting people, so he oftentimes starts off easy and works his way up in power as he needs it. Honestly, if anyone was going to push Izuku to the point that he blew up, Oboro had always thought it would have been Bakugo, but watching now, Monoma seems to know how to push Izuku's buttons perfectly to get a reaction. Maybe the kid just has a natural talent for annoying people. Oboro had known what was coming the second Monoma mentioned Bakugo, and he's not surprised that Izuku's expression hardens as he grits his teeth and prepares another attack. He is, however, surprised by the fact that tendrils of black shoot from his arm instead of the blast that Izuku had been lining up to do. Oboro knows instantly that something is wrong. It might look like some new, exciting aspect or branch of One for All, but it's different, and it's violent. Oboro springs to his feet as the new quirk flings Izuku around, smashing through pipes and aiming for both Monoma and Hitoshi, who had been hiding in the shadows. Oboro had hopped down from his vantage point, internally grateful, for probably the first time ever, that he was a weightless being who could float up to the poor kid. He makes it to Izuku relatively fast, even as the new quirk jerks him around. Oboro doesn't get too close, but he's comforted by the fact that he could help Izuku if need be. "Izuku!" Oboro had shouted, just trying to get his attention. The Blackwhip strikes through Oboro's midsection, and it probably would have hurt a lot if he wasn't a ghost. "What the hell is this?" "It's overflowing." Izuku grits his teeth, shaking his head as he grips down on his own wrist to the point that Oboro doesn't think that he even has any circulation. The boy's face twists up in pain, and what little control he'd managed fluctuates. Oboro silently curses those vestiges. "Don't help," Izuku demands, mouth hardly moving past the pained grimace. Oboro's sure he's the only one to hear the grumble, and it's obviously directed at him. "I'm serious. I can handle it." Says the guy getting tossed around like a rag doll. Oboro scowls back at the teenager, wincing as the quirk flicks right through his head. It doesn't hurt, but it does feel uncomfortable. "I thought they said you weren't ready." Izuku squeezes his eyes shut as he wrestles against his own wrist, the darkness shooting out and clinging to a nearby pipe and dragging Izuku along. Oboro breathes out a snarl under his breath as he shoots off after the quirk, trailing behind it. "I can," Izuku gasps desperately, speaking just loud enough for Oboro to hear as he half-heartedly dodges the wayward flicks of energy. More hit him than he manages to dodge. "I can do it." "Hey, you've got to calm down," Oboro pleads as he moves even closer to the teen, close enough to touch if need be. "You're going to hurt yourself. You're going to hurt someone. You can do this, Izuku. It's just another stupid curveball those vestiges are throwing at you. Overcome it. Cap it, like you've done with your quirk, just for now." "Why are they doing this?" Izuku gasps out, sounding overwhelmed and pained. Oboro doesn't even think that he'd heard him. "I had control. I was getting so good with One for All. I can't control this. I don't know what this is. I need One for All back. I can control that." Oboro doesn't know what to say. He doesn't know how to help without disregarding Izuku's wishes of no contact. All he can do is watch as the new quirk licks at his arm, slowly but surely consuming him. He doesn't even know how Cloud would help in this situation. It's not like he could separate Izuku and the quirk by a dense cloud when they're literally attached. Uraraka grabbing a hold of Izuku takes Oboro by surprise, as does Hitoshi using his quirk to get Izuku to give up his control. It's really smart, honestly, but Oboro can think about that later, when he's not skidding to his knees beside an unconscious Izuku who'd laid clutched in Uraraka's arms. Shit, Oboro huffs out anxiously, tugging his fingers through blue wavy hair. I really hope you One For All assholes are happy. He's not ready, so why don't we just throw another new quirk into his hands, huh? Brilliant, guys. Hitoshi joins Izuku down on the ground, dropping to his knees beside Izuku, hands hovering uselessly over the green-haired teen as he surveys over him before his gaze flicks quickly to Uraraka. Is he okay? Yeah, Uraraka nods breathlessly, staring down at Izuku. He's not hurt, I don't think. He didn't fall at all. If he's hurt, it's from his quirk. Hitoshi squeezes his eyes shut and nods. Yeah, he croaks out. I saw it flinging him around. I knew he wasn't in control. He'd never used force like that on students, and it wasn't aiming for us, Monoma and I. I don't know if it was aiming at all. Uraraka shakes her head sharply. It was just attacking, at random. I was so scared for Deku. As soon as I saw it going after us, too, I knew something was wrong. Hitoshi nods at her point, staring down at Izuku with an unreadable expression. I let up my quirk now, Hitoshi admits after a moment, setting his hand on Izuku's forearm, the one that had been consumed by the quirk. Right after you two were on the ground, it's all on him now. What the hell was that, anyways? Has he always been able to do that? I've never seen that, Uraraka breathes out, shaking her head. That's new. I've never seen Superpower do anything like that. He sounded like he was in pain. It's like he had no control all of a sudden. Midori's so good with his quirk now. I don't know what happened. The two students lapse into silence as they watch Izuku closely. He's already starting to stir, expression pinching in almost the same way it had when Izuku jolted awake that morning. Oboro readies himself to stop another lashing attack, but it doesn't come. No one else seems to come to investigate, not the teachers or the other students in the exercise with them. It's not entirely surprising, since most people just seem to expect weird things from Izuku, so it probably didn't look as bad as it really was. Still, Oboro wonders where Shota is. He had to have seen that ordeal, too. And there's no way he wouldn't be all over Izuku's quirk doing something weird after the hypothermia scare. Both Shota and Hisashi had been keeping a close eye on the kid. It's only when Izuku's stirring, awake, pushing up on Uraraka's lap and absently glancing between his two friends that Oboro spots Shota hanging back, half hidden behind a large pipe, watching closely just out of sight to the students. Oboro's never seen the man look so torn between stepping back and checking in. He seems to decide on the former, though, slipping away before Izuku can spot him. Oboro isn't sure what to think of that, but he knows Izuku would have gotten upset if he was treated any differently. Shota's good at walking the line between overstepping and letting the kids come to him, and though Izuku is his foster son, in school he's still a student. Just from seeing Shota's expression, Oboro knows this won't be forgotten or brushed off, even if he is letting Izuku continue. If he's up, conscious and moving, Shota really has no motive to cancel the exercise. That doesn't mean that he won't be questioning it later, though. It takes a long second, as Izuku is pushing himself up and assuring his classmates that he's okay, for the green-haired teen to notice Oboro watching from the side, a safe distance away from the chaos of protective students crowding into Izuku's space. They stare at each other for a long second, and Oboro's throat feels dry as he croaks out, Are you sure you're okay? What happened? What was that? Izuku breaks eye contact, deliberately glancing away and flipping a dismissive hand at his side that Oboro knows he's the only one to notice. Something about the action irks Oboro. It's not like he doesn't have a valid reason to be concerned. Izuku had literally just manifested a new quirk, had been tossed around by said quirk, and only managed some control of it when he'd lost consciousness. The ghost heaves a sigh, glancing toward the sky as he considers his options before glancing back down. He's surprised to see Izuku's eyes on him, even if it's just from the side. Fine, Oboro huffs in defeat. You win. Whatever. I'll stop asking. He turns from the boy, exhaustion settling deep in his consciousness, ignoring the surprise and desperation that quickly settle in Izuku's expression as the ghost leaves, phasing through a large pipe until he's gone from sight. He knows he'd stop in his tracks if Izuku called out, but the teen doesn't, so Oboro leaves without another word. Izuku watches him go as he worries his bottom lip between his teeth and half-heartedly assuring Hitoshi and Uraraka that he's feeling fine. Anyone with eyes would be able to see Izuku is definitely not fine, but in the heat of the exercise no one's going to push. Oboro supposes he's being petty, reacting like this when he knows Izuku won't be able to defend himself or explain himself, without revealing his quirk to Uraraka, who's still fawning over her teammate. A small part of him wishes Izuku would just once act without considering who's watching or listening. He wishes Izuku would forget, just for a second, that he's a ghost and just talk to him like they're friends. It's an unfair ask, he knows, but he selfishly wishes that Izuku would. He can't help but feel angry as he settles back in his vantage point, too worried about Izuku despite everything to even consider leaving, but too angry with Izuku to hang around any closer. He draws into himself, watching the exercise continue on as if Izuku hadn't just manifested a dangerous new quirk that had run amok with the teen in tow, aiming to hurt people and damage the course. He doesn't know how anyone can just continue after watching that, the students, the teachers. Maybe it's his outsider point of view, years of just watching what goes on within the walls of Yuuei from the sidelines and actually thinking about what they're doing considering everything. This won't be forgotten. Oboro knows as much, but still, how can they be so easily brushing it aside? Pretend it's normal when everyone knows this isn't something that Izuku had been capable of before. Oboro draws his knees to his chest, setting his chin in the gap as he watches Izuku and Uraraka now fighting Monoma. Hitoshi's gone from the fight, but Oboro sees him lurking with his capture weapon in hand. Hitoshi obviously wants to fight Izuku head-on, but Oboro can't find it in himself to be excited for the rematch. Frustration had settled in his chest, and it's been so long since he'd felt like this. The fight gets interesting, everyone doing their part to beat the other side, trying to get the upper hand in the fight. Everyone uses their quirks, Izuku even managing to actually use that new quirk of his, even after its traumatic manifestation. It's not long until everything comes to an end, Team 1A winning this round and the most battles overall. After the event is announced as finished, 1A the victors, Izuku takes exactly 2 steps toward his peers and promptly passes out. Oboro's heart is launched into his throat as he's at Izuku's side before he even realizes it. Oboro is quickly joined by Shota, then Hitoshi and the rest of the teachers. 1A as well as a few of the 1B students make an attempt to crowd in as well until Namuri ushers them back as she calls for one of Recovery Girl's medical bots. Shota's checking Izuku's pulse and breathing and doesn't seem overly worried as he does so, despite the downward curl of his lips and the exasperation clouding his features. Shota mutters something about probable quirk exhaustion to All Might and Vlad, which is relayed back to the students. Some of Oboro's worry saps out of his body, but he knows he can't relax entirely until Recovery Girl gives the same diagnosis. She at least knows about one for all, so if something's not right, she'll be able to pinpoint it, right? Oboro knows All Might doesn't know what's happening. He just looks as confused as Oboro feels. And that's how he finds himself here, staring down at Izuku and silently wishing those vestiges were able to come out of the quirk. He now, more than ever, wants to throw hands with a 200-year-old vestige. He joked about it before, but the more he sees of the vestiges, little regard for the current wielder, the more pissed off he gets. Oboro hopes First is really just trapped in the quirk and not a coward who's too afraid to face what he's doing to Izuku. This isn't right. There's nothing about this quirk that is right. Dead vestiges should not be pushing so hard for perfection from a high schooler who already has everything else on his plate. Why is Oboro the only ghost who sees that? Who can consider the fact that Izuku is capable of great things but won't ever get there if he runs himself into the ground before he can? You can only lift so much weight before your knees buckle. They're just suffocating him under another quirk when he can't even handle 30% of the first one. It's not how you teach someone. Oboro draws in a shaky breath, scanning the length of the teenager's supine frame, and he always looks small when he's swaddled in hospital whites. There's just something about it that makes someone look tiny, even on Recovery Girl's small cots. Oboro glances over at the clock, frowning to himself as another hour ticks by. He stares off into space thoughtfully, turning the day's events over in his head. Is there anything he could have done differently? Had there been any way he could have actually helped during that manifestation? Would Izuku still be here now if Oboro had been more persistent that morning? It's the ruffling of sheets that draws in his attention. He refuses to admit he startles, attention jumping to the side, where very drowsy Izuku squints at him. "Hey," Izuku's dry voice greets softly. "Am I alone?" "Just me." Oboro grits his teeth, looking away sharply. He thinks back to earlier, Izuku's dismissive flick of his hand, and clenches his jaw harder as the hurt settles once again now that the teen is awake. "But I can go. You don't need me around, you've made yourself clear on that." "That's not what I—" Izuku groans lightly, pushing himself up. He scans the room quickly, verifying before continuing. "You know that's not what I meant. I knew you were here. I meant Shota or Hizashi or even Recovery Girl, not you, never you. I was talking to you. What do you mean I've made myself clear?" Oboro remains silent, staring daggers at the wall he's facing. He just knows if he looks back at Izuku he'll break and lose his composure. "Wait, you're mad at me?" Izuku breathes the statement out like it surprises him, a strange distant dip to his tone. "I knew you were upset when you left like that, but I don't—" "What gives you that idea?" Oboro refuses to look back, voice laced with sarcasm. He sees Izuku wince out of the corner of his eye, and it bites down on the guilt he feels for causing it. It's not like I warned you about this. It's not like I predicted this exact thing happening just this morning when you refused to slow down. What would I have to be upset about? Izuku shoots Oboro a look, shifting so he's sitting a bit more upright. You're mad that I manifested a new quirk? No, I'm mad that you keep brushing me off. Oboro fumes, whipping around to face the teen. Not everything is about that stupid quirk. I'm mad that you have zero regard for yourself. I'm mad that every time I try to help you, you brush me off and ignore me. I'm mad that you tell me you'll listen to me, but you just flap your hand and expect me to leave when it's inconvenient for you. Izuku looks thoroughly scolded, hands dropping to his lap like a scolded schoolboy as he watches Oboro with wide eyes. Oboro can't even find it in himself to be sympathetic or apologetic as his frustration finally seeps out. He's only distantly aware of the fact that Izuku just woke from quirk exhaustion. I get it. I'm a ghost. Oboro snaps, ignoring how Izuku's expression twists into something Oboro can't place. I know that you'll never see me like you see everyone else. I'll always be on the sidelines, and I don't mind that. I've accepted that. I know what I am, but I also know I care about you. I've watched you from the moment that you got that quirk, the first time you ever used it. I see what you're doing to yourself. I'm not... Oboro turns away sharply, scoffing harshly and accidentally cutting Izuku off. He's aware of his voice wavering as he continues. I see you keep pushing yourself, and I get it. I know this is important. I know that people are counting on you to master One for All, and that you've got this weird, I don't need anyone complex that you hide behind, because trusting people is scary. I get it. Oboro. No, the ghost snaps, glaring at the boy in the infirmary cot. Look, you tell me we're friends. You tell me that you trust me. Just this morning you told me you'd listen to me, but even when I try to help you, you brush me off. You look like shit, Izuku. You're exhausted. You're overworked. You're wearing yourself too thin between school and life and your quirk and One for All, keeping all these secrets. I have to keep these secrets, Izuku mutters, voice soft. He hasn't once let his volume rise, but Oboro knows that's just because Recover Girl's in the adjoining office, waiting for Izuku to wake up. If he alerts her to his awakeness, their conversation's over. The door's mostly closed, though, and Oboro knows that she's fully invested in her injury reports. He'd accidentally pushed the chair that he was sitting in back earlier, the legs scraping against the ground, and the woman hadn't come in to investigate. No, you don't. Oboro refutes tightly. Do you know what would change if you let Shota and Hisashi in on either of your secrets? You'd have support. You'd have boundaries that you're too selfless to set for yourself. You'd have someone to talk to who isn't a ghost. You'd have people who'd actually understand you. They don't care what you have, Izuku. They love you. You don't know that. Izuku looks away sharply, followed by a lighter. You know I can't. No, I don't. Oboro groans. He hates when they walk in circles like this. He hates when Izuku's so blinded by people who hurt him in the past to accept that people will actually accept him. You can't keep letting this happen. You're in the infirmary, and not because of broken bones. They're going to catch on. You manifested a whole entirely new quirk, and I know that it won't be long before those vestiges spring something else on you. They're not stupid, Izuku. There will be more, Izuku admits, and for a second Oboro is confused. You asked me, back in Ground Gamma. There'll be 7 total quirks. One for All, and this quirk included. The vestige... Banjo-san. He told me, so when The teen bites his lip, looking unsure how to continue. Willingly surrender your consciousness to Itoshi's brainwashing quirk in a flimsy attempt to make it stop? Oboro's face twists up like he'd eaten a slice of lemon. So there's a chance this might happen 5 more times? Wonderful. This just keeps getting better and better. I'm starting to think I was right about those quirk ghosts, by the way. It's called Blackwhip. Izuku continues slowly, as if Oboro hadn't said a word. You asked earlier. Well, that's what it is. It's an emitter type powered by emotions, I think. Anger, mostly. I couldn't hold on to it. It was just so powerful. I was just so mad at Monoma talking about Kachan and All Might, and it's not entirely Kachan's fault. Not even really his fault at all, and... I get it. Oboro scoffs lightly. I could tell you were angry. Monoma pushed all the right buttons to piss you off. I just didn't think you'd... Yeah, Izuku breathes out, shaking his head. Me neither. Izuku's quiet for a second, watching the ghost. Oboro feels his gaze on him, but refuses to look back. I don't mean to, you know. What? Oboro looks back finally, quirking an eyebrow. Brush you off, Izuku whispers, picking at a thread on the glaringly white blanket pulled in his lap. It just happens. I've always got to be conscious of who's around, and when we're not alone, I just... Yeah, Oboro says flatly. I get it, it's fine. I didn't know you felt like that. It doesn't matter. Oboro shakes his head dismissively. No. Izuku frowns, genuinely distraught. It does. It matters to me. You're my friend, and I don't see you differently, but you are different. I know I subconsciously withdraw sometimes. All my life I've been in tune to ghosts and keeping quiet around them because socializing with them is what drove people away. It's what flagged me as different. I learned long ago that being different is not something you want to be, but I never considered what that might be like for you. I get it. Oboro mutters again. He does get it. He knows Izuku as well as anyone, if not more considering all the time they spend together. You don't have to defend yourself to me. I know this is your secret. I'm not defending myself. Izuku shakes his head, shifting slightly. I really didn't know you felt like that. It makes sense. I've never considered... I didn't even realize that I was doing it. I never meant to hurt you. I've never been close to a ghost, not since meeting you, and I never thought that my habits would hurt you. I know. Oboro bites the inside of his cheek. He knew Izuku hadn't done any of it on purpose. The kid was far too kind-hearted for that. Look, I don't blame you, and I didn't mean to guilt you. You should have told me earlier, Izuku mutters, finally catching Oboro's eye. His lips are pinched chidingly, and his arms lace over his chest. You know, for a guy getting on my case about trusting and honesty, you sure have been holding back. Our situations are a bit different. Oboro scoffs, but he does offer a small half-smile. Oboro doesn't have the heart to remind Izuku that he barely exists outside of Izuku himself. At the end of the day, he's still a ghost. Izuku just has this weird power of making Oboro feel like a ghost, but also making him feel completely human as well. Not to me, Izuku hums back. I'm glad I know now. I'll try to break that habit. I still can't, talk to you with others around, but I'll try not to brush you off. Especially when you're concerned or trying to help me. I knew that's what you were doing, but I've been an ass, so I'm sorry. Oboro tries to ignore the fluttering fondness he feels for his friend, bowing his head thankfully. Thank you. Tell me when I'm being an insensitive jerk, Izuku continues. Just like I tell you when you overstep. You're allowed to have feelings, Oboro. You're allowed to be angry with me and to tell me off when I deserve it. And I do value your opinion, even if it didn't look like it before. You're always just trying to help, and you're honest with me when no one else seems to be. You're my best friend, and I've been taking your presence for granted. I need to listen to you more. Finally, something we agree on. Oboro huffs playfully, fighting down the flush threatening to consume his cheeks. Now, stop it with the compliments or you'll make me blush. Izuku smiles, soft and personal, a look Oboro doesn't see very often. I'm sorry I didn't realize sooner. No worries, it's hard to worry about something like that when you're already struggling to keep your secret straight. The gravity of the situation is back, churning Oboro's stomach unpleasantly. You know everyone hates seeing you here, right? You're so busy trying to be the perfect wielder and busy training and learning all these quirks that you let yourself suffer in the process. We care about you, dude. I know. Izuku sighs, palming at his eyes. Maybe you're right. I mean, would it really be so bad to let one or two people in on the one-for-all secret? Shota is my homeroom teacher. If they're warned up front about the dangers and they accept the risks, why couldn't I tell them? Hang on. Oboro jerks up in surprise, narrowing playfully, accusing eyes on Izuku. What now? Who are you and what have you done with my secretive I'd rather die than talk to anyone about my problems, Izuku-kun? Shut up. Izuku flushes brightly, the color looking healthy on his pale, exhausted complexion. There are dark rings under his eyes from the lack of sleep, and you can see how dull and tired his eyes look. Oboro wishes that he pushed harder that morning for Izuku to go back to bed, or even just not go for an hour-long run, but he knows Izuku would have never listened. He's bull-headed just like every other hero that Oboro knows. There's something about this, though. That has Oboro easing into his chair and letting the tension in his shoulders ease. It's something that feels right. Like they're right again. The banter is slowly returning, and the dark, suffocating air in the room easing to the regular, light, friendly one. Oboro hates being mad at people. If being a ghost has taught him anything, it's that holding on to anger is a trivial thing. Having it is healthy. Holding it is just a pain. Izuku quirks his head lightly to the side, watching Oboro with a knowing look. I said I was going to listen to you more, didn't I? You've been very vocal about this, from the moment you knew. Maybe... Look, I can't tell anyone about my quirk. I just can't do it, but I don't know if I can handle 5 more quirks alone. It was already hard enough getting a handle on Blackwhip today, and I still have so much work to do to trust it as a tool. And there's one for all, too, and I'm in over my head. Admitting you have a problem is the first step to fixing your problem, Oboro says offhandedly, words coming out like he's quoting something. Izuku eyes him silently until Oboro glances back with a cheeky smile. I watch a lot of commercials. It works for you too, though. Universal words of wisdom. Uh-huh. Izuku snorts a quiet laugh under his breath. Anyways, Shota's probably already onto me, especially after Blackwhip manifesting today, and he does know about me being a late bloomer. It wouldn't be too surprising, right? He is already halfway there, Oboro agrees. And he is definitely onto you. He, Nem, All Might, Vlad, and Nezu are all having a meeting right now. I would have been there, but I didn't want to leave you alone. I do know they're confused, though. I mean, manifesting a completely new quirk is practically unheard of, kiddo. Right. Izuku winces nervously. I have to tell All Might first. I can't spring this on him. And if he says no? Oboro cocks his head in question. Izuku shoots him a flat look. I said tell, not ask. Oboro lets out a low whistle. You're really serious about this, huh? I can't keep doing this alone. I need help. 7 quirks is a lot. All Might is a good mentor, but I need good teachers, too. Yagi-san and I are very different people. We don't struggle the same, and One for All has obviously reacted differently between us. If One for All is only going to get stronger, I need people to talk to. I need people I trust. I'll always need All Might in this, but All Might had Gran Torino, right? He's never had One for All in his possession, so maybe Shota can be my Gran Torino. It's a solid argument. Oboro shrugs. Frankly, he shouldn't have a say in who you tell. You shouldn't have to enforce your decision. One for All became your secret when All Might passed it down, knowing all the risks that came with it. I still look up to him, though. And that won't change. Oboro frowns thoughtfully. Look, if he cares about you, he'll be okay with you needing more help, and he never mentioned anything about more quirks, so I bet this is getting out of hand for him, too. If the options are watching you drown alone or letting you cling to a life preserver that Shota happens to be the one throwing, any well-meaning adult would choose the latter. Oboro hesitates. And if he doesn't, maybe you don't need energy like that in your life. Yeah, Izuku agrees distantly. You're right. The teen is quiet again, mouth pressed downward in a thoughtful frown as he lifts his gaze to the ceiling and stares for a moment. Oboro doesn't want to disturb the comfortable silence they'd settled into, so he just sits at the boy's bedside, letting his eyes fall shut. It's Izuku clearing his throat that breaks Oboro from his thoughts. So, what actually happened? I mean, I'm in the infirmary, but I felt fine after Blackwhip was under control. It's all sorta... Izuku gestures a hand, biting at his lip. Foggy. You were an idiot. You really should have listened to his ghost friend. Oboro snaps, voice holding no real heat. You passed out in front of your teachers, classmates, and 1B. You scared the shit out of everyone because you don't know when to take a break. You've been unconscious for 7 hours, you know. This is exactly what I was talking about this morning, if only you'd had this listen to Oboro epiphany earlier. I passed out? Izuku whispers, looking surprised. He bites hard at his bottom lip. In front of everyone? Yikes, that's embarrassing. Well, quirk manifestations take a lot of energy, Oboro states sharply, aware Izuku already knows this. You were already exhausted, and then you manifested that thing, Blackwhip or whatever, and used up your energy. Then, like an absolute idiot, you brushed off your exhaustion again and used One for All and that new quirk to finish the battle. You hit the ground as soon as the adrenaline of that battle wore off. I actually sort of remember that, Izuku hums out. Toshi and I were fighting each other, weren't we? I think my team won in the end, right? That's all I remember. Hard to remember things you're unconscious for, Oboro chided sarcastically. Izuku puckers his lip in offense. Why do I get the feeling that you're not going to let this go for a while? Why do I get the feeling that you're correct? Izuku. Both Izuku and Oboro startle up, and attention shooting to the door. Shota stands in the infirmary door, and just a second later, Recovery Girl peeks out from her adjoining office. Oh, dearie, the old woman tuts. I didn't hear you stir. Have you been awake long? No, ma'am. Izuku shakes his head, rubbing at his eyes that suddenly look a lot more tired than before. Oboro snorts to himself at the fact, then snickers when the teen shoots him an annoyed sideways glance. How are you feeling, kid? Oboro lets himself fall through the chair as Shota steps into the room, plopping down into the chair. Izuku chews on his lip to keep from smiling as the ghost groans from the floor before promptly pushing himself up and perching on the edge of Izuku's cot. Tired, Izuku finally admits. That's to be expected, Recovery Girl chides as she joins them by the bed, settling at Izuku's side and scanning him sharply. That was a bad case of quirk exhaustion, dearie. You were out cold by the time you arrived here, but from Aizawa here's account, it was definitely overexertion and quirk overuse, a draining manifestation if nothing else. Speaking of, Shota interjects, watching Izuku calmly. Care to explain what that even was? That new move out there didn't look anything like superpower, Izuku, so what the hell was that? Shota-kun, dear. Recovery Girl taps the bottom of her cane against Shota's knee, with probably more force than necessary. The boy just woke. Give him some time to collect his thoughts. Be a doting, concerned dad after that. Waiting a moment won't kill you, I assure. I wasn't. The dark-haired man blinks, face contorting into what Izuku thinks may be embarrassment at being called out by the old woman. Shota scrunches his nose up, letting his hair fall into his face as he turns sharply away from her and Izuku. Yes, ma'am. He's blushing! Oro teases loudly, perking up and leaning toward the underground hero, as if Shota could see and hear him. Aw, Sho-chan! So soft for the son you love. See, Izuku, I told you they loved you. He wouldn't react like that if RG didn't hit the nail right on the head, right? Also, the ghost adds slyly as Izuku leans back in the pillows. Notice how he didn't deny it? That's a total dad right there. Your total dad. Izuku sinks into the pillows even further, silently glad that he's the only one who has to suffer hearing Oboro. He lets his eyes slip shut and settles into the silence of the room as Recovery Girl bustles around, sorting out some vitamin gummies that she's insisting he take before she even considers discharging him, and Shota texts probably Hizashi. He silently mourns this piece, knowing it won't be the same when he's asked to speak to All Might before explaining anything to Shota. He hopes his guardian isn't too upset, and he also really hopes that All Might doesn't get into trouble like last time. All right, everyone. This concludes Chapter 43 of Yuuei Survival Guide. Chapter 44 will be next. I hope you all are still enjoying this one, and as always, thank you so much for listening.